Lady Margaret Beaufort is probably one of my favorite female historical characters that I don't really talk about much. The reason for that is because I think that there is a misunderstanding about who she truly was and what kind of woman she was. In this video, I want to tell you about her life. I also want to tell you why I think she definitely is not the one who ordered the murders or possible murders of the Princess of the Tower. And I also want to make some comparisons on how she's been portrayed in the popular culture. I think Margaret Beaufort is in many ways the perfect villain for so many, just because she's a woman who protected her son and who wanted power for her son, like many other mothers in the medieval and early modern times. Margaret Beaufort was born on the 31st May 1443 and she died on the 29th of June 1509. She's one of the major figures of the War of the Roses, and that is because she is the mother of Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII of England. She's a descendant of King Edward III, and Lady Margaret Beaufort passed a disputed claim to the English throne to her son, Henry Tudor. Capitalizing on the political upheaval of the period, she actively maneuvered to secure the throne for her son. When I say that, is that she played actively a role trying to get the throne for her son. She really thought that she had a claim herself to the English throne, and she passed it on to her son and backed up his claim to that throne. I think what's interesting with Margaret Beaufort's life is not just what she did before her son became king, but also what she did when her son became king and when he was in power, because she actually played an active political role during her son's reign. Did you know that Margaret is credited for the establishment of two prominent Cambridge colleges, the Christ College in 1505 and beginning the development of St. John's College, which was then completed after her death in 1511. Margaret Beaufort was the daughter of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, a legitimized grandson of John of Gaunt, the first Duke of Lancaster, and the third surviving son of King Edward III, by his mistress, later wife, Catherine Swynford. From a very early young age, Margaret Beaufort was played as a pawn. She was married and promised to men when she was only a child, an infant. And there's lots of discussion of was she, like, how many marriages she have in her own thoughts and under canon law, like what actually happened. She only recognized Edmund Tudor as her first husband. Edmund Tudor was the eldest son of the king's mother, Catherine of Valois, by Owen Tudor, and that is where there is this Welsh and English history coming together. Was only 12 when she was married to Edmund, who was 24. So here we have a very grown-up adult with a very young teenager. They married each other in 1455, and it was the beginning of the War of the Roses. Edmund was a Lancastrian and was taken prisoner by Yorkists a year after the start of the war, and he died of the plague on the 3rd November 1456. He left behind a 13-year-old widow who was pregnant. And sometimes I think that we only think about, dates and facts when we talk about history, but here we have a 13-year-old who was pregnant. And I cannot tell you, the type of fear she must have felt for having to give birth and to be a mother in such a harsh world, a scary world. And here that's the beauty and the strength of Margaret, who became such a strong woman during that period. But when people are saying she's evil, there's this, she's that, do you understand the strength she had to gather within her to become the woman she was meant to be. She gave birth to Henry Tudor when she was in the care of her brother-in-law, Jasper Tudor. He was not physically strong and mature for her age, obviously. The birth was extremely difficult and almost killed her. After that birth, Margaret Tudor had other marriages, but she never became pregnant again. So we believe that something really wrong happened while she was giving birth to Henry Tudor. And I cannot imagine how awful and dreadful it must have been for her. But it also explains to you the link between a mother and a child, between a mother and a son. He became everything. But it's also through that very painful labor that their bond was created. And I think sometimes we dismiss that part. We just think, oh, she gave birth, it was difficult. What does it mean? It probably means hours and hours of pain. And the fear of dying, and the fear of having your baby dying. It can be extremely traumatic. During Henry's childhood, obviously, there's the war, and Margaret is going to, protect her rights, protect her son's right, and it's going to be a very difficult time for her. Everything changed in 1483 with the death of Edward IV, when Richard III took the throne for himself. At that time, Margaret Beaufort was in service of his wife, Anne Neville, because her son was a threat to Richard's, claim to the throne, or to any Yorkist really. He had been exiled, and Margaret is going to negotiate with Richard the return of her son. There is a belief that Margaret Beaufort is somehow, responsible for the death of the Princess of the Tower, which would not make a lot of sense when you think that her and Elizabeth Woodville worked together to get Henry Tudor on the throne. I don't think that Margaret Beaufort could have done anything like that, could have ordered anything like that. Especially, we have to realize when it would have happened. Obviously, in 1483, there was absolutely no need for the princes to die. When Richard III took the throne for himself, wherever you want to see it, in the end, he became King of England. The two women are going to conspire against him to get Henry Tudor as his replacement. And so here you can think that Elizabeth Woodville knew that her sons were gone, and that the only way to challenge Richard III's authority was to get Henry Tudor on the throne. Rumours about Margaret Beaufort's implication with the death of the princess comes in the 17th century, where she's basically massively demonized and vilified. And it always happens with very strong women throughout history. It happened with Catherine of Medici, it happens with Mary of Guise, it happens with so many women who had any type of power. And it is because we live in a patriarchal society, sometimes borderline misogynistic, and where, we love creating this vilification of women who stand up for their rights, who have a voice, who want to use their voices. And so here it's exactly what happened to Margaret Beaufort in the 17th century. But again, there is no strong evidence or any type of real evidence about Margaret Beaufort being in any shape or form responsible for the death of the Princess of the Tower. Now, what I find really interesting with Margaret Beaufort is that she became a very more important political figure under her son reigns. But the way she's been portrayed, so you can see in The White Princess, for example, you see that she's a very vilified person. I think that our opinion of her has been tainted by the 17th, 18th, 19th century portrayals and this type of rewriting history in a light that is not favored to women. So it's what we have today. But obviously, none of it is true. And I know she's been also sometimes kind of compared to some characters and the idea, for example, in Game of Thrones, Cersei Lannister is tapped a bit into, Margaret Beaufort is the type of like doing anything. This idea that she did anything, or she would have done anything for her children, is a bit like Cersei Lannister. She would have done anything for her children, and Margaret Beaufort would have been the same. And I think that is quite wrong to see it. Yes, a mother will be protective. Yes, a mother would do anything to protect and ensure the happiness of their children. But I think here we're missing the point that, especially when it comes to Margaret Beaufort, of the historical and political context behind it that forced her to defend her own rights, but through her son, to the English throne. And also because, in many ways, Richard III, whatever we say, if you believe that Elizabeth Woodville's children were really illegitimate, I don't believe that it's a really convincing case or claim. But if you believe that, and then it made sense for Richard III to take the throne, you could still have in mind the fact that he still did take the throne, and Edward V and his brother Richard were both taken into the Tower to prepare for the coronation, because they thought, that Edward would become king, and somehow they never left the Tower. Or even if you think that somehow they never got into the throne, right? Let's not even talk about if they escaped or not. I don't believe they escaped. I believe they died in the Tower. I just don't know who exactly is responsible. It's the biggest mystery, historical mysteries, that we have. But what I'm saying is that you have either way to see it, and for most people, Richard III took the throne for himself, even if he thought he was in his own rights, because he was the brother of the late king, da-da-da-da. There are others that were also disputing just the fact that a Yorkist should be on the throne. So, and the fact that the Woodvilles would then side with Henry Tudor is quite interesting in itself. In many ways, it means they know that they no longer have their own blood. So they probably knew that their boys were gone. So again, all of this I think is very interesting, and it shows how complex the situation was for Margaret Beaufort. But if you have to take one thing about Margaret Beaufort, is the fact that she was a force to be reckoned with. She was a woman who had gone through lots of hardships, and who rose to power through her son in many ways. And of course she influenced him, and I think she influenced others. And I'm sure she was not all, flowers, unicorns and rainbows, but that is because no one really is. And she rubbed people the wrong way. We all do in our own ways. And I think that sometimes when we look at historical characters, we have this harsh criticism and this harsh treatment that we wouldn't have towards one another nowadays, or I hope we wouldn't have towards one another nowadays. But here I want to tell you that the story and the things you know or you think you know about Margaret Beaufort are extremely, entrenched into this vilified portrayal of her that were written in 17th, 18th, 19th, and even 20th century. So I hope here that you understand that she was more than that. She was more complex. She's also a woman who fought for her own life, truly. And that makes you completely different, I think. That makes you someone sometimes more vulnerable, but that vulnerability is going to become and be transformed into an incredible strength. I really hope that you enjoyed this Once Upon a Woman video, and let me know what you think about Margaret Beaufort in the comment. I would love to know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!